Right, so this is when did we put this tunnel up? That was 3 years ago.
3 years ago, September.
September.
Yeah.
And basically, when we came here, we had 4 mature trees, eh?
Yep.
How old are they?
They'd be sort of between 8 and 10 years.
8 and 10 years old.
Yeah.
One of them was riddled with phytophthora. You were going to pull it out, and we decided just see what happens.
Yep.
Yeah. And then since then, you planted. There was 6 or 7 trees, wasn't there? Young trees.
Yeah, 1, 2. I think there's about 10 actually.
10 1-year-old trees. When were they planted?
They'd be just over. They'd be 2 years now.
So they were planted in like not last November before.
Yep.
And then they basically grew a season.
Yep. And
then flowered and carried fruit, and we'll have a look at them soon. When did you plant these ones?
they would have been in probably about 6 months.
6 months.
Yeah.
And before they were here, there was a whole lot of tamarillos.
Tamarillos were here as a trial, and we ripped them out. And
which were a bloody white fly nightmare.
White fly everywhere. Yeah.
The tree here was basically the same size as that tree in November, not last November, November before.
Yeah.
And then it grew, and then flowered, and it's that fruit you can see on it. Did you prune that all the first year?
Yep. Not the first year. It might have been tipped,
Yeah.
just to create more flowering points and stuff.
Yeah.
And the flowers would have been removed that first flowering year as well.
Yeah, okay.
And then the second flowering year, it's done that basically.
Yeah. And there's, I think I counted that a month or so ago, and there's 45 fruit sitting on that little tree. If that was a 2-year-old tree sitting outside and they had 45 fruit on it, well, what would you expect? How much growth would you get off it?
Well, generally a lot of 2-year-old trees you'll actually pull the flower off because they won't handle fruit at all.
Yeah.
Whereas they've fruited and kept pushing flush,
Yeah.
which is sort of unusual for a little tree to do that. So potentially it should flower again this year and do the same.
And so it's set that fruit. What was the key thing? Like, it would have had a reasonable size flowering on it for a little tree. When did you see the flush pushing?
Flush. The strange thing is with them undercover, as soon as they start flowering, they seem to start pushing flush. Whereas trees outside, they'll sort of towards the end of flowering, then they'll start pushing the flush.
Yeah.
So and by doing that, potentially you should have fruit every year because you're pushing that early flush.
Yeah. And so there's obviously been a fair bit of growth out of this tree. How many pruning cuts have you made on this tree during this summer, the last summer just gone?
We generally try and prune them. It depends on the season, but it's probably about 3 times.
Yeah.
Do a late spring, sort of midsummer, and a late summer, autumn, depending on.
Get rid of that autumn flush.
Yeah, and the beauty in the autumn being able to turn the water off means you don't push all that autumn flush that you don't want.
Yeah. Okay. And you can sort of see there's 2 cuts you can see just on that limb there. So that would have been done in the springtime, right?
Yeah.
And this will be a late summer sort of thing.
Yeah.
And there's cuts you can see all the way through here. There's another cut there, another one there, another one there. So otherwise this tree would have been sitting twice the height that it is now if you hadn't pruned it, where they had a lot more vertical and not as all this horizontal growth.
And you can see in here there's potential flower coming through this spring as well.
Yeah. So it's looking pretty positive.
Yeah. And this on the bigger trees, I mean they've set 2 reasonable crops back to back.
Yeah.
Which for an avocado tree is quite unusual.
Yeah. So that vertical stuff, like that one there, that's the sort of stuff you were cutting off in the summer, right? Anything that was growing that vertical, you're trying to keep the horizontal, flatter stuff for flowering wood for next year. So basically the pruning regime is the summer. In the early summer you'll go through and take the vertical stuff off, then it'll branch, then you'll take the vertical out of that and it'll branch again. That's sort of the scenario?
Yep, that's what we're doing. And I mean once we've picked that, this year we'll come in and do a couple of reasonable sized cuts, down to decent wood, and then we'll sort of train that as we go through spring and summer.
And so there's 2 reasons for that. You're trying to let light into areas of the tree that you want light to get, and you're trying to keep your tree height, because we're limited to how high we can go with a tree.
Yep. Well, I mean, coming up 3 years, and these trees haven't changed in height since we started this. Basically, we're maintaining them without sunny, and maintaining that height just through pruning. Just pruning.
Yeah.
And because they're carrying a crop load,
slows them down.
And they're not so vigorous.
Oh, cool. So, and the characteristics of the fruit compared to outside?
Big, clean, dark green, and very uniform.
last year when you picked the crop, you packed it. What sort of pack? What pack out?
Oh, it would have been. We didn't pack it separately because it wasn't a sort of big enough volume. But this year with all these little trees coming on, we'll pack it separately. And I would imagine last year it was 99, if not 100% pack out. And this year would be very similar.
Yeah. And the rest of your 35 hectares last year was?
We had a lot of pinnacle staining, so it was quite bad. I think we were in the mid-50s.
Mid-50s.
Yeah. No pinnacle staining under the covers, no wind rub.
Bugger all that. And what sort of spray regime you had through here?
Just been basically spraying through the sides of the tunnel.
So spraying through the netting?
Through the netting. I haven't seen any leaf roller damage on any of the fruit yet.
Thrips?
Thrips, no, we haven't had a problem with thrips.
Six-spotted mite, you had a bit of six-spotted.
We have a little bit of six-spotted mite. With this tunnel not being able to run the sprayer through the middle of it, if we were able to do that, I think the mites wouldn't be a problem either. We'd be able to control them. Yeah.
We picked off one of the outside trees just on the other side of the shelter out here. It's the typical size fruit that was on that tree. It's a typical pear-shaped teardrop that you have for house avocados. But if you compare it to these fruit under here, it's not only the size difference, but if you look at the shape of the fruit, you look how much thicker the neck is on the stuff under the tunnels compared to the stuff under the trees. And this is pretty typical of the shape of the fruit outside, and this is pretty typical of the shape of the fruit in here. It almost looks it's been sprayed with Sunny a couple of times, because Sunny generally thickens up the neck of that fruit, but this hasn't had it. None of this has had any Sunny on it, so it's just been a little thing that we've noticed. What for fertiliser and stuff? What have you done in here fertiliser wise?
We set it up to do fertigation, but just through time limitations, we haven't sort of been doing much of that. We've just been hard fooding, and it seems to be watering in fine. Fruit size is up, and they seem to still have plenty of vigour. So hard food seems to work alright.
Brilliant. And watering? How much watering?
I've got a hydrosense meter that I put on the ground, but this time of year it's probably 20 minutes 3 times a week, with 35 litre an hour sprinklers.
And you got 2 per tree on the
bigger trees? Yeah. Because there's no rain as such, your root mass is limited to your irrigating area. So we put 2 sprinklers on just to get the root mass there. That seems to be working.
Because you started off with 1 on the bigger trees, and you sort of they didn't have a lot of vigour, but then you changed to 2, and it's sort of noticeable difference.
Sort of looked like it was struggling to push size in the fruit, and then once we put the 2 sprinklers on, it sort of seemed to push the size and
the vigour.
Yeah.
This tree was like that tree we took a photograph outside of Phytophthora when we covered it with plastic. You haven't put any foliar or we haven't injected it. Have you sprayed any foliar on it?
I might have had a run through from the outside through the netting, but it hasn't had any injecting. It's just pretty much been left to its own device, and it's it took a couple of years for it to grow flush to flower, but now it's loaded.
So this is its first real crop, eh? It had nothing last year, did it?
Yep.
So it basically grew and then grew again and then flowered this.
Once you got that 2-year-old wood to flower on, basically.
And I've counted that tree, as best you can count, there's over 450 fruit sitting on that tree. If you look at it from the outside, it's hard to see the fruit except in a couple of places. These out of the road, there's just fruit all the way right from the top right down to the bottom, which you basically can't see from the outside of the tree because it's just covered in growth, which is a good thing because all that growth is potentially going to be flowering wood for next year. So hell of a lot of fruit on a small tree. So if we can get every tree to fruit like this every year, look out.